2024 Honda-Prologue-Elite vs 2024 Chevrolet Blazer EV comparison. Honda has shown us its upcoming 2024 Prologue, the all-electric SUV it designed and built in conjunction with GM. While Honda says it was a joint development effort, there's a little too much interior content from the 2024 Chevrolet Blazer EV to really think that it was much more than Honda stylists doing what they could with the given constraints. But what they did accomplish is frankly impressive, and what Honda may have actually done is create a better Blazer EV. Smoother, calmer styling. The Prologue's exterior styling might not really scream Honda so much, but the family resemblance to other products from the automaker is there in the front-end design. It's a much cleaner, simpler design than the strakes, scoops, folds and creases that Chevy gave the Blazer EV. Honda did the opposite. The Prologue is simple, more cohesive and arguably better looking than the Blazer EV. It's certainly less polarizing than the Chevy, and that alone might boost its popularity among buyers. It's got the goods. While the Blazer EV is supposedly going to be available as a front dash, rear or all-wheel drive model, you only get FWD or AWD in the Prologue. There's only one battery, the 85 kWh unit that likely will be in most Blazer EVs, and Honda says the powertrain for the AWD Prologue will make 288 horsepower and 333 pounds-feet of torque. These are respectable numbers, and the 300-mile range that Honda estimates should be sufficient. However, the 155 kilowatt maximum recharge rate is rather a letdown given we were told GM's Ultium systems are supposed to be able to handle more than that. Still, for most family use and charging at home, Honda's choices for the Prologue work fine. The deciding factor. The Prologue's interior is where you really see the GM parts sharing come through. The switches, controls, steering wheel and multimedia system all look as though they've come out of the GM catalog. That's not a bad thing, however, as the GM parts bin these days is easily up to snuff with the rest of the industry and has solid feel, top-notch displays and impressive equipment. The only somewhat disappointing bit was the instrument cluster, which could use some reconfigurability and pizzazz. The rest of the Prologue's interior feels suitably comfortable, upscale and attractive, at least in the top Elite trim I sat in. Visibility out is excellent, there's plenty of room in either front or rear seats, and there's a decent amount of cargo space. The dashboard isn't as racy or interesting as in the Blazer EV, but it's in keeping with the rest of the Honda aesthetic, a horizontal orientation that has less of the vaguely retro look found in the Civic and Accord. As a 5-occupant SUV, the Prologue will do nicely as a replacement for a gasoline-powered Honda like the Passport for families wishing to kick the carbon habit. But what might indeed steal buyers away from the Blazer EV and into Honda showrooms is the knowledge that you can get a nearly identical vehicle mechanically to the Blazer EV for a similar price and get Apple CarPlay. GM has made the controversial decision to not offer Apple CarPlay in its future EVs, taking away a highly popular feature and trying to replace it with a homegrown Google-based system. For buyers who don't want to give up something they may rely on every time they get in a vehicle, having a viable alternative like the Prologue might be a deal-breaker for the Blazer EV and a serious win for Honda. How Honda turned the Chevy Blazer EV into the Prologue electric SUV. From the outside, these EV SUVs are very different. But what about under the skin? Honda isn't hiding the fact that its new Prologue electric SUV is built on top of the same underpinnings as the Chevy Blazer EV. Executives talk about it openly, saying that Honda's partnership with GM helped the company speed its first mass-produced EV4 the US to market much quicker than they otherwise could have. If we only had pictures of the exteriors to look at, the automakers could have pulled the wool right over our eyes. Looking at photos of the 2024 Honda Prologue and the 2024 Chevrolet Blazer EV, you'd never know the two electric SUVs are built from the same parts. The Prologue's minimalist, neo-rugged, design language is the dictionary definition of restraint in automotive styling, painting a stark contrast with the Blazer's Coke bottle beltline, kinked roofline, and boomerang styling flourish just behind the front wheels. The visual differences make it clear that the Prologue is more than a badge engineering job, but just how deep do the changes go? Here's what we know about how the Prologue's development. Minding the details, the Prologue's unique sheet metal is built on top of GM's Ultium electric architecture and around the same structural hardpoints as the Blazer EV. That means it gets the same 85.0 kWh battery that's standard in the Blazer and the same front and rear permanent magnet motors that are good for the same combined 288 horsepower in all-wheel drive models. The wheelbase of both SUVs measures 121.8 inches and their overall lengths are within fractions of an inch. The design team at Honda's Los Angeles studio can take all the credit for drawing an SUV that looks like a Honda within the constraints of Chevy's engineering requirements. When it came time to ready the design for production and finesse the underpinnings, work moved to GM's Warren, Michigan Technical Center, where Honda stationed about a dozen employees to guide the GM engineers. With most of the hardware already locked in, engineering the Prologue largely came down to turning the available tuning knobs to suit Honda's preferences. John Huang, Honda's development lead for the Prologue, says his team targeted a sense of direct connection between the driver and the vehicle as they dialed in the suspension, steering, and accelerator calibrations. The 3 driver-selectable regenerative braking calibrations, however, are ported over from the Chevy untouched. After benchmarking GM's system, Honda determined there weren't any improvements to be made. Honda did have a say in one critical detail of the powertrain layout, too. The electric Chevy Blazer will be offered with front dash, rear dash, and all-wheel drive. Honda's luxury division will sell rear and all-wheel drive versions of the 2024 Acura ZDX, which is also built from the same Ultium hardware. But the Prologue will not be offered with a rear-wheel drive option, instead offering buyers either front or all-wheel drive. That was important, Huang says, to give Honda customers the stable, predictable handling dynamics they're used to. Where worlds collide, things get interesting when you open the door to the Prologue's cabin, where you find an amalgamation of Honda textiles and GM plastics. The seats and armrests in the Elite trim prototype pictured here are covered in leather that looks like it was lifted out of a current Honda Pilot, yet the window switches, the steering wheel, and the climate controls are pulled straight off the shelves of a GM parts warehouse. We're told the original Prologue interior design concepts moved most of the secondary controls into the touchscreen, but Huang ultimately insisted on a volume knob and physical buttons and dials for the climate system. Even if those parts are very clearly shared with the Blazer EV, they're one of many small examples of Honda's pragmatic engineers making decisions with their equally pragmatic customers in mind. The Blazer EV starts up as soon as the driver presses the brake pedal, but the Prologue features a push-button ignition on the dash. Where the Blazer's charging port door motors up and down, the Prologue swings open manually like a conventional gas filler flap.